Picture this. We're all sitting around finishing dinner, and my son-in-law, who's gotten a bit too cozy with the whiskey, suddenly chucks a glass in my direction. Why? Just because I refuse to refresh his drink. "Servants must listen," he roars, like I'm some sort of help instead of his wife's dad. Well, imagine his face the next morning. He got quite the wake-up call, one that was as chilling as it was meticulous in its execution. Leroy had practically drained the whiskey bottle by then, and he was on a roll about household staff. I'd been watching as he poured himself glass after glass, each one a little fuller than the last, since he'd barged in about 30 minutes prior, tie all crooked and jacket draped over a chair. The air in the room seemed almost tangible with his frustration. "My boss wouldn't know a good deal if it hit him upside the head," he grumbled, his words starting to blur together. With a snap of his fingers, he sliced through the room's heavy silence. 3 months of effort, down the drain just like that. Georgiana reached over to touch his arm gently. "Maybe things will be different tomorrow, darling. You know how Mr. Hendricks can be," she reassured him. There I was, at the head of the table, feeling the solid oak beneath my fingertips. Dinner was long over. The room was bathed in the bronzing end of day. They'd called my place home for 8 months now, ever since Georgiana called me, a twinge of awkwardness in her voice, to see if they could bunk here while Leroy sorted out his work mess. What was meant to be temporary had turned into a marathon stay. Sitting pretty all day, no stress, no deadlines, without a boss breathing down your neck, he scoffed at me with his bleary eyes. "Dad, did you finish that legal thriller I mentioned?" Georgiana asked, trying to lighten the mood. "The one about that judge? You said you wanted to talk about it." I kept my hands steady on the table. "Seems like your husband's got something to get off his chest," I replied. Leroy leaned back, the chair protesting under his weight. "Living like royalty while we hustle, that's what's on my mind," he said, words hanging heavily around us. Georgiana tightened her grip on him, her knuckles turning pale. "I spent 3 decades taking the bad guys off the streets," I told him, every syllable slow and measured. "I've earned every square foot of this space here. Don't mistake my retirement for laziness." Our family memories watched us from the walls, photos from happier days, including Georgiana's wedding, when smiling didn't take effort. Leroy poured himself another drink, the whiskey swirling around the glass. His manners were slipping, and a meanness was surfacing. He downed most of it in one long gulp. "Please, Leroy," Georgiana murmured, standing up with trembling hands to clear the table, dishes clinking together. "How about I clean up and we can catch that movie you were talking about?" But Leroy was in no mood to step back. He leaned forward, elbows planted firmly on my table, glass wavering in his grip. "You want to know my take?" he jeered. "I reckon you've forgotten how hard real work can be." I stayed put. I'd learned that being still could be powerful during my courtroom days. I met his gaze, letting it stretch. "People out there break their backs working, unlike the cushy life of reading and napping," he continued, pointing towards the window. "That's quite enough," I whispered gently. Georgiana stood between us, using one hand to steady herself on the table, the other still on Leroy, aiming to keep things together. But even the strongest bridges snap under too much strain. "Dad's earned his downtime," she said firmly, "and he's been a lifesaver, letting us bunk here this whole time." Leroy laughed, a sharp, bitter sound slicing through the room like a blade. He suddenly got to his feet, the chair screeching against the floor like nails on a chalkboard. His grip on the glass wobbled as he thrust it toward me. "Is it being kind if we're reminded every single day whose roof we're under? Every single day," he taunted. I replied, "I've never brought it up." "You don't have to," he shot back. "It's in every look you throw our way, like we're here just for your amusement." That whiskey bottle lurked just behind Leroy on the sideboard, close enough to grab without even having to reach. I'd made sure it was in an easy spot before we even sat down to eat. The bottle of whiskey sat untouched on the table, and my son-in-law, with an expecting look, held up his empty glass towards me. "Hey, old man, fill her up," he said, like he thought everyone should jump when he says so. Although the bottle was right behind him, he just stayed comfy in his chair. My daughter, Georgiana, took a quick breath. "Leroy, it's right there behind you. Grab it yourself," she suggested gently. Leroy locked eyes with me, challenging me silently. "Too much to ask you to serve yourself?" he added. I got up, taking my time and making sure my chair didn't scrape against the floor. Standing tall, I stared back at him with the same look I used to give in the courtroom when people thought they could push me around. "We're not running a butler service here," I said steadily. "And there's only one person calling the shots in this house, and that's me. Remember, you're here as a guest, Leroy." All of a sudden, the atmosphere shifted. Georgiana's hand hovered near Leroy, not quite touching. The chandelier buzzed softly above, and I noticed the closed front door across the room through the archway. Leroy's face turned a deeper red as he clutched his glass. It looked like it might just shatter in his grip. He swayed a bit, whether from too much whiskey or his anger, I couldn't tell. "Guest?" he echoed, almost growling. I pointed calmly at the bottle on the sideboard, within his reach. "It's right there. You can pour your own." His expression shifted, one I knew well from court, a mix of anger and desperation when emotion pushes logic out of the way. Georgiana stepped in, trying to smooth things over. "Let's just," she began, but clearly, Leroy had crossed a line. Looking at him across my dining table, it dawned on me that despite months of trying to get along, it had come to this: disrespect from a drunk right in my own home. Leroy edged closer, so close I could smell the whiskey on his breath. The glass rattled against his chest as he waved it, but I didn't flinch. I've dealt with tougher characters in court, those who had nothing left to lose. Leroy was just a drunk sales manager. I stood my ground. "Pour my drink," he slurred slowly, dripping with arrogance. "Old man, do as you're told." The heat in the room cranked up a notch. Outside, night had fallen, and the shadows cast by the chandelier danced sharply across Leroy's face. "Nobody's in charge here, just me," I replied, my voice cold and cutting. "Remember, you're still just a guest." Georgiana stepped in between us, her eyes pleading. "Please, you two, stop. Leroy, you've had enough. Dad, let it go." But Leroy wasn't listening to her. Before I had time to react, his arm swung wildly, and the glass flew my way. Time seemed to slow. I watched in shock as it spun, whiskey trailing through the air, ice cubes tumbling free. Then it struck home. The glass smashed with a sickening thud against the side of my face. Pain exploded as it broke, spraying whiskey and shards of glass everywhere. Ice scattered across the floor. I staggered back, my hand going instinctively to my hurting cheek. When I pulled it away, there was blood on my fingers. Georgiana's shocked gasp pierced through the haze. She whirled around to Leroy, shoving him back. "What the hell did you do?" she cried, her voice high and frantic. Leroy just stood there, confusion and regret mingling on his face as if he didn't mean for any of it to happen. His mouth opened, no words coming out. "Get him out of here," I said, my voice trailing off, even to my own ears. Blood trickled down my face, warm against my skin. "Get him out of my sight." Georgiana was in tears, heartbroken by the chaos that had just erupted. Tears were streaming down her face as she shoved Leroy, causing him to stumble backward. He lost his balance, and she took advantage of his awkward steps to maneuver him away. "I'm really sorry, Dad," she said, her voice cracking, one hand pressing against his chest while the other reached out towards me, but it was too late. "He didn't mean it. Please let me just get him upstairs." I'm sorry, Georgiana. I opened my mouth to respond, but she was already guiding him, using both hands this time towards the stairs. Please, just give me a second to handle this, she begged, not turning back. Just a minute. They disappeared up the stairs, his footsteps heavy and unstable. I caught fragments of Georgiana's voice, laced with desperation, but her words were a blur. A door creaked shut above me, leaving an unsettling silence. I stood alone in the dining room, pressing my hand lightly against the wound on my temple. The dinner plate sat forgotten on the table. Across the room, a whiskey bottle stood like a silent witness. Shards of glass glittered at my feet, sparkling under the chandelier like tiny diamonds. My legs wobbled, not from the blow, I'd faced worse in my time, but from the raw wrongness of it all, in my own home, around my table, after months of patience and silence, making room for them in my life. This was the result of my kindness. I walked through the hallway to the bathroom, each step amplifying the quiet of the house. Blood dripped onto my shirt, staining it dark. The bathroom light flicked on, casting a harsh fluorescent glow. The mirror didn't lie. The cut was about 2 inches long, nowhere near needing stitches but enough to bleed profusely. A bruise was already forming, spreading purple like ink in water. My cheekbone bore most of the impact, swelling and distorting my face. But my eyes drew me in. They were different, harder, colder. The eyes of a person who's just pieced together their case. I gingerly touched the wound, feeling the sting from where glass had bitten into my skin. The pain was sharp and immediate, but I welcomed it. Pain meant clarity. Pain ensured this moment wouldn't slip away with morning light and sneaking doubts. I'd given them 8 months. 8 months of opening my home, sharing my space, tolerating Leroy's barely hidden scorn, and Georgiana's attempts at keeping us at peace. I told myself it was temporary, that family mattered most, that patience equaled strength. But they hadn't seen patience. They saw weakness. Leroy took my generosity for surrender. He interpreted my silence as consent. He saw my age and thought I was somebody he could push around, disregard, treat like hired help. He overlooked something crucial. I'd spent decades learning the law, gathering evidence, crafting airtight cases, ensuring justice finds those who believe they're untouchable. My reflection in the mirror stared back at me, blood trickling down, something new in my gaze. Not rage. Rage is hectic, disordered, for men like Leroy. This was something different, cold and calculated. This was resolve. I twisted the faucet on, letting cold water wash over my hands, then splashed my face, careful to avoid the wound. Down the drain, the water swirled pink. A car drove by outside, its lights momentarily illuminating the window. Upstairs, silence reigned. Georgiana picked her side, choosing her husband over making the call to the police. She apologized while shielding the man who'd just lashed out at me. In that critical moment, she showed her colors. Let her share his bed tonight. Let her lie awake, wondering what comes next. Let her tell herself whiskey and stress make violence excusable. Let her remember the look on her father's face as her husband's glass hit him. I dried my hands on the towel, gazed at my reflection again. The prosecutor in me was setting everything in place. Unprovoked assault, physical evidence, a witness right there, and a clear ongoing pattern. Leroy thought he was establishing his dominance. What he really did was hand me exactly the means to bring him down. Sleep was elusive that night. My head was buzzing with everything on my plate, strategizing, those early morning calls, gathering papers, and firming up my next steps. Leroy had really pushed it when he hurled that glass, and now it was my move. He'd soon understand, just like every other wrongdoer, that being patient doesn't mean I'm a pushover, and staying quiet isn't me giving a pass. There are folks who've mastered the timing of justice, and Leroy was about to get schooled. So there I was, wide awake, my head pounding in unison with the dilemma replaying in my mind. Every throb dragged me back to my dining room scene. By 3 a.m., I had ended up in my office chair, watching the minutes dawdle by. The house made its usual groans and mutters, ones I'd grown accustomed to over 3 decades. Everything upstairs was eerily calm. Georgiana and Leroy, behind their closed door, might have been sleeping or just faking it. I caught myself wondering if she was awake as well, grappling with her husband's actions. The first light crawled in around 6 a.m., painting the room with hints of pink and gold through the blinds. I headed for the bathroom and caught my reflection. What I needed was clear evidence. Overnight, the bruises had blossomed even more. A purplish blob had taken over my right temple, fading into yellow at the edges. The cut from the glass traced 2 inches along my hairline, still obvious despite its scabbed cover. My cheekbones swelling had thrown my face off balance. I reached for my phone and started snapping photos. One of my profile, where the morning light touched up the bruise. A head-on shot to capture the full impact on my face. A close-up of the cut displaying its depth. Each image time-stamped, March 13th at 6:15 a.m. Having seen enough courtroom action, I knew what evidence would be crucial for prosecutors. By 6:30, I was in the kitchen, phone to my ear. "Scottsdale Police, how can I help you?" came the greeting. "I'm calling to report an assault that occurred here at my home last night," I said, keeping my voice even and clear. "The person who did it is still here. I have visible injuries and am prepared to give my full account." In less than 30 minutes, they arrived. A male and female officer, both meticulous and professional. I walked them through my home like I was presenting to a jury. "This is where it happened," I pointed out, indicating the dining room. Leroy's chair was still skewed out of place. Glittering on the hardwood floor were shards of glass. I hadn't touched a single one. The shirt I wore last night draped over a chair, its collar stained with dark dried blood and whiskey. The female officer captured everything with her camera while her partner took my statement. "Mr. Wood, can you walk us through the events? Take your time, start from the beginning of the evening." So I did. Dinner, Leroy's drinking, the arguments escalating, his demand, my refusal, the glass soaring and meeting my face, Georgiana doing her best to hold him back. I delivered it all in that cool and composed tone polished over 3 decades in a courtroom. "And Mr. Patterson, where is he now?" they inquired. "Upstairs in the guest room, second door on the right," I answered. They headed upstairs, their footsteps heavy on the carpeted steps. I stayed in the living room, nestled into my armchair, hands intertwined, just waiting. When they tapped on the bedroom door, the voices were dulled, but Leroy's carried through, thick with confusion. "What's happening?" I caught as the door opened wide. There was more chatter, but I couldn't make it out in full. Then Leroy arrived at the top of the stairs, clad in boxers and an undershirt, squinting at the hallway lights. The officers were by his side, doing what they had to, unfazed by his yelling. "Wilbert, what the hell have you done?" he bellowed, anger bubbling in his voice. "This is crazy. It was an accident. You seriously called the cops on your own kin?" I met his gaze but stayed silent. I let him see the bruise, the officers, let the reality sink in. "Sir, please get dressed," the male officer directed. "You are under arrest for assault." Georgiana burst into the hallway, her face pale and stunned. "Hold on. Can we talk about this?" she pleaded. But the conversation was over. The arresting female officer began reciting Leroy's rights, while her partner waited patiently for him to throw on some clothes. Those familiar phrases filled the air. "You have the right to..." "You better keep quiet. Anything you say can be used against you." The finality of the handcuffs snapping shut on Leroy's wrists seemed to echo throughout the house, an undeniable sound that signaled there was no turning back. As they headed downstairs, Georgiana followed, tears streaming down her cheeks. She clung to my arm as I stood there. "Dad, please, make them stop. This is all just a mistake. He's my husband. Think about what this means for us," she implored, her voice filled with desperation. The way she looked at me, her eyes wet with tears, it squeezed at something deep inside me. Yet I couldn't go back on everything I taught her about right and wrong. "I raised you to know everyone must uphold the law," I said gently. "He broke it in my home. What kind of example would I set by ignoring that? That actions have no consequences." "But he's family," she cried. "The law doesn't bend for family," I replied. Her grip on my arm loosened as she stepped back, the hurt evident as if I had physically pushed her away. The officers guided Leroy past us, out the door, into the bright morning, while Georgiana kept pleading with them on the porch. Through the living room window, I watched as Leroy was gently placed into the back seat of the squad car, his head guided down, and the door clicked closed behind him. Georgiana stood in the driveway, still in her robe, watching until the car disappeared. The patrol car left quietly, just another ride with someone who had broken the law. I stepped back from the window, letting the curtain fall. The house felt strangely different, like a tension had been lifted. Georgiana came back inside, passed me silently, and headed to her room, shutting the door softly, yet somehow it sounded louder than if she had slammed it. I moved to the dining room, carefully gathering the broken glass into an evidence bag left by the officers. Each shard sparkled briefly in the light before landing inside with a gentle clink. My phone was on the table. Picking it up, I found the number I needed. The courthouse would open at 8. I planned to have a protective order filed before lunch. This was just the beginning. About a day and a half later, Leroy walked out of Scottsdale jail, blinking at the sun. I wasn't there, but Georgiana later recounted the scene in a worn-out voice. She'd driven to pick him up, parked nearby, and watched him emerge, looking disheveled and stressed in the same clothes as before. As they drove away, I was seated in a courthouse hallway not far off, waiting to be called in. The protective order hearing took just 15 minutes. I showed the judge the photos, medical records, and police report. The judge, a seasoned woman in her 50s, signed the temporary order without hesitation. "Stay at least 100 yards away from the petitioner and his home," she said, pen scratching across the document. "This takes effect immediately, legal enforcement, with a full hearing in 3 weeks." I thanked her, holding on to the stamped papers, a binding and authoritative decision. Turns out, I learned later, that a court official was sent to Leroy as he left jail, delivering the order promptly. With emergency protective orders, they get served fast. While Georgiana's car idled in the lot, Leroy sifted through her phone. An official approached their window with papers to deliver. "Leroy Patterson," the official announced. Leroy looked up, confused. "That's me," he answered. "You've been served with a protective order," stated the official, handing the papers through the car window. Leroy unfolded them, reading through the restrictions printed boldly. Georgiana told me all the color drained from his face, leaving him looking ghostly. "All right, you have to always stay at least 100 yards away from Wilbert Wood and where he lives." "Got it?" The clerk's voice echoed around us. Leroy's eyes widened, and he stammered, "But this is my place, I live here. How can he make me leave my home?" Except, it was never his home. It was mine from the start, and now I had legal backing. That afternoon, they roamed the town searching for an apartment. Georgiana was driving, while Leroy was glued to his phone, scrolling through ads. Frustration was written all over his face. For a moment, it seemed like things were turning around, but chaos reared its head soon after. Panic hit like a freight train. The least expensive apartments they found were all about $400 a month for a poky little studio in areas they would never have considered before. Eventually, they settled on a spot in some complex just off Indian School Road, on the ground floor, where walls were thin as paper, and the constant smell of hot asphalt lingered in the air. As they strolled in to talk to the leasing agent, she looked as worn out as her updo hairstyle. She turned to Leroy. "We're going to need around 3 days to check your employment and all that." Leroy didn't skip a beat, quickly stating, "I've got a job. It's in sales." But she raised a skeptical eyebrow at the state of his credit report. "There might be some issues with this," she said. Georgiana piped up, "I'll co-sign for him. My credit's in good shape." Her eyes went back and forth between them. "If anything goes south, you both have to cover the rent." They nodded, understanding the stakes, and by that afternoon, they put their names on the dotted line. Georgiana later sent me a text asking when they could pick up Leroy's belongings. Responding clearly, I specified, "Thursday from 2 to 4 p.m., and I won't be around. Only take what belongs to Leroy, changing the locks on Friday." On that Thursday, I made sure I was out of the house by 1:45 p.m., heading to a nearby Starbucks. I sat sipping coffee and pecking away at my laptop, all while strangers sorted through my stuff at home. It was tough resisting the urge to head back early and ensure they only took his things, but I respected the boundary, 100 yards. At 4:15, Georgiana texted me a single word: "Gone." I leisurely returned, opting for scenic roads over the freeway. When I arrived, the house looked unchanged from the outside. Inside, though, the void spoke volumes. The closet in the guest room stood wide open, empty, and the drawers were all pulled askew like they'd scurried out. Their bathroom was bare, only ghostly rings showed where toiletries used to be. I wandered through room by room, mentally checking off what was missing. Small stuff had vanished. My favorite coffee mug, a phone charger that wasn't Leroy's either, but probably got packed anyway. Not enough missing to make a big deal out of. In the guest room, I stripped down the bed and opened the windows, letting fresh air in. The mattress was just a mattress now, no longer their little haven. Finally, my home was all mine again. But something inside said I wasn't quite finished. That night, still feeling restless, I went online searching for private detectives in the Scottsdale area. Found 3 that seemed decent. One specialized in finance and employment verifications, so I set up to meet him the next day. The investigator's office was tucked away in an unassuming building on Scottsdale Road, the type of place where businesses can vanish without a trace. Robert Chen, a man around his 40s with glasses that looked too sleek, welcomed me in with a firm handshake and pointed to a chair across from his desk. "Mr. Wood, what do you need help with today?" I slid the police report over. "It's about my son-in-law. I want the lowdown on his finances, debts, assets, job details, any weakness he might have." Chen read the report quietly, his face giving nothing away, until he looked at me with some understanding. "Trying to right a wrong, are we?" A small curve lifted his lips. "How deep do you want to dive?" Our eyes met, and I thought of Leroy holed up in that shabby apartment, probably thinking all he lost was some ego and a court date looming ahead, with no clue of what could be coming next. It was about 3 weeks after Chen joined my team when I found an email popping up in my inbox with the ominous subject line, "Investigation complete, L. Patterson." Sitting at my kitchen table with my morning cup of joe, I clicked it open and decided to print it out. The printer spit out a whopping 47 pages, still fresh and warm in my grip. I laid them out like a deck of cards on the table, playing a different kind of solitaire. The first few pages dove into his financial mess. He had 7 credit cards, all pushed to their limits. The guy was buried under $43,000 in debt, with interest rates as high as 28%. His monthly minimum payments were eating up 1,200, a sum that just about mirrored his rent. As I kept reading, I lost track of time, and my coffee grew cold. What I found out next made my stomach churn. His job performance was in free fall. His sales commissions had tanked by 60% over the past year. He'd lost clients left and right, missed targets, and his performance reviews took a nosedive from meets expectations to probationary status. His boss had. So here we are in March, and Leroy's been acting odd, distracted, even agitated. Our customer complaints seemed to be piling up. I flipped to page 23, and it hit me hard. There it was, plain as day. Bank statements from Georgiana's retirement account showed 3 withdrawals over 3 months, $7,000 in January, $5,000 in February, and $3,000 in March. In total, $15,000 vanished while he stayed in my home, enjoying the meals I cooked. I traced the dates with my finger. January seemed suspicious, as he'd complained about holiday bills. February took the cake as his worst sales month yet, and March, well, just 2 weeks shy of when he shattered that glass. All the while, he was siphoning funds from her future, smiling at us over dinner. The next part knocked the wind out of me. Chen had managed to speak to 3 of Leroy's co-workers. Their statements, all typed up nice and neat, were brimming with direct quotes. I had to read them a second time just to absorb it all. Leroy had apparently told them the old man wouldn't last much longer, and that he'd soon be inheriting an $850,000 house, speaking as if it were a sure thing. One of them spilled how he blathered on about his plan. Move in, wait it out, inherit. Those were his exact words, but it was the last statement, though brief, that hit like a sledgehammer. Leroy had joked about how expensive nursing homes can be, implying I wouldn't spend on one when I could be cared for right at home, which of course meant me in Georgiana's house. I set the papers down, half expecting them to ignite. Leroy hadn't moved in because Georgiana wanted him there. He moved in because he saw me as a stepping stone, and my home as nothing more than prime real estate waiting for his takeover. Then the phone rang. Chen was calling. "Mr. Wood, I've sent everything your way. His financial situation is even worse than usual. Maxed out credit cards, a dwindling income, and he's been discreetly dipping into your daughter's retirement without her being aware." I replied softly, "They sure do." "Anything else I can do for you?" Chen inquired. "No, that about sums it up. Thank you." I hung up, staring down at the mountain of evidence spread before me. As the morning light streamed in, it illuminated the columns of numbers, each one telling a story of negligence, bad decisions, theft, and pure greed disguising itself as family loyalty. By midday, I'd reached out to a notary service recommended by my bar association and booked an appointment for the following morning. By late afternoon, I'd drawn up a new will, putting my 30 years of legal experience to good use to make it as airtight as possible. The next morning, I found myself sitting with a notary named Patricia Reeves. She had that grandmotherly look with silver hair and little reading glasses dangling on a chain. She took her time with my handwritten draft. "Mr. Wood, this stipulation is quite unusual. Your daughter only inherits if she's divorced. You realize this could cause some family strife?" I nodded. "Yes, I'm aware. That's the whole point. If she picks him, she chooses a life of poverty. If she chooses herself, she gets security. It's her decision." Patricia paused, eyeing me carefully, then nodded. "You have every right to do this. Let's get this typed up for your signature." It took about an hour and a half to get everything finalized. The condition was straightforward. Georgiana inherits the house, retirement accounts, and everything else only if she's divorced from Leroy Patterson before I die. If she doesn't meet that requirement, my entire estate will go to the Arizona Coalition Against Domestic Violence. Patricia watched closely as I put my signature on the document, sealed it up, and attached the stamp. "Now that's official. Need some copies?" she asked. "Yeah, 3 copies," I replied. "And can you do me one more favor?" I passed her a letter intended for Georgiana. It was brief and didn't give much away, simply saying that the estate planning papers were updated with new terms affecting inheritance. "Have your lawyer explain it," I added. "Send it certified, would you? She'll need to sign for it." Patricia sealed it, placed the postage stamp on top, and handed it back to me. "You can drop this off at any post office," she mentioned. I drove over to the mailbox nearby, holding the envelope and feeling its weight, a packet filled with uncertainty, sure to spark questions Georgiana couldn't ignore. What did her father do, and why now? She'd find out in 3 days, right before Leroy's court date. The timing wasn't a coincidence. I wanted her riddled with doubts, with everything up in the air when Leroy faced the judge. I wanted her scratching her head over her decisions, her future, and everything she thought she understood. While her hubby was dealing with serious consequences for his aggressive actions, I was sorting out my financial future. Doubt crept in like a tiny crack spreading silently in a wall, and that quiet nagging could indeed cause a lot of harm. I slipped the letter into the mailbox and heard that definitive clang as the metal door shut. It felt complete, like there was no turning back. Strolling back home, the sun was dipping towards evening, casting long shadows on sidewalks I'd known for 30 years. Just ahead was my house, solid and standing firm, the very home Leroy was banking on inheriting from me. He was so eager for it, he could almost taste it. He bragged about it at work, as if it were already his. He moved in, counting down the days till it officially became his. But now, the game had changed. Georgiana wouldn't see a penny unless she left him first. He'd been slick, dipping into her retirement, planning to repay it with what he thought he'd get from me. Only now, my estate came with conditions. She'd get stability if she dumped him, got nothing if she stayed. Fair trade, in my opinion. Leroy had locked her out from any gains as long as they remained together. Let's see how he handles that retirement theft revelation when the letter arrives. In downtown Phoenix, the towering Maricopa County Superior Court shimmered with its 12 stories of glass and concrete catching the morning light. I got there at 9 a.m., wearing my sharp navy blue courtroom suit, a nod to the seriousness of the legal process I kicked into motion. Around 20 people were scattered across the hard wooden benches. I picked a spot in the 3rd row center, perfect for observing Leroy at the defense table, catching his every squirm. Just past 9, courtroom doors swung open. In walked Leroy with his public defender, Georgiana, clinging by his side. His suit didn't fit well, too big in the shoulders and sleeves hanging long, probably borrowed. His tie sat awkwardly, not straight. On seeing me, his face went a darker shade and his jaw clenched. Georgiana gave him a comforting touch, whispered something, steering him to the defense table. He couldn't sit still, stealing looks over his shoulder repeatedly. I just sat there, unmoving like a statue. The prosecutor, a young woman with a leather briefcase, arrived and exchanged documents with Leroy's lawyer. The plea deal was ready once the judge approved it. We stood as the judge, an older man, graying hair at his temples, face neutral, came in. Leroy got up reluctantly, like it pained him, while I stood effortlessly, old courtroom instincts kicking in. We all settled in our seats, and the judge began checking through the paperwork. It was Arizona State versus Leroy Patterson, case number CR 22572. The prosecutor stood up and addressed the judge. "Yes, Your Honor. Here's what the state proposes. The defendant will plead guilty to simple assault. In exchange, he'll receive 18 months of supervised probation, need to cough up $20,500 in fines within 60 days, attend a certified anger management program for 26 weeks, and do 50 hours of community service over the next 6 months." The judge turned his gaze towards Leroy. Mr. Patterson, do you get what you're being charged with? Leroy gave a straight, almost lifeless, yes. The judge continued, are you agreeing to this plea of your own free will, without any pressure? Leroy responded again with, yes. You do realize that by entering this plea, you're admitting to assaulting your father-in-law at his home? Leroy paused, took a moment. His lawyer leaned in, whispering something urgently. After a pause, another yes. The judge pressed on. You're clear on the probation terms and understand that any screw-ups could land you in jail? Leroy simply nodded. I understand. The public defender slid the papers over the table. Leroy stared down at the plea deal, all official-looking, just waiting for his signature. He picked up a pen, pressed it down to sign, so hard that it nearly ripped the edge of the page. The judge took the signed paperwork, reviewed it, and said, the court accepts your guilty plea and sentences you based on the outlined terms. Your probation begins now. You'll be assigned an officer who'll explain everything. Your community service must be fully documented, and anger management classes need to be state certified. Any questions? For a moment, it seemed Leroy was about to speak, then stopped himself before trying again. Your Honor, I just have to say, his lawyer attempted to intervene, grabbing his arm, but Leroy shook it off. This is absurd. It was an accident. I didn't mean... He halted, glanced over at me from across the room. He's sitting there, enjoying this as if it's entertainment. He's wrecked my life over an argument. The judge's voice boomed, cutting through the tension. Enough, Mr. Patterson, he declared. We've heard all statements. You've admitted your guilt. Case closed. We're done here. With that, the gavel hit the block, firm and final. Leroy froze, visibly shaking with anger he was barely containing. Next to him, Georgiana stood up, gently touched his back, and nudged him towards the exit. As they walked down the aisle, Leroy's footsteps reverberated like heavy drum beats. When they reached my row, Leroy stopped, turned, and jabbed a finger in my direction. You'll regret this, old man. It's all on you. You've wrecked everything. His words echoed off the walls, capturing everyone's attention. Security was instantly on alert, ready to step in. The judge hammered the gavel twice, sharp and decisive. Mr. Patterson, come forward, he commanded. The room fell silent. Georgiana clasped her hands over her mouth in surprise, and Leroy's lawyer turned ghostly white. Leroy remained fixed, still pointing at me, suddenly realizing his big blunder. Mr. Patterson, the judge called again, approach the bench. With slow, uncertain steps, Leroy trudged back to his spot. His legs felt like jelly, unreliable. His lawyer stood beside him, looking dejected. The judge leaned in, voice firm and precise. You just threatened the victim in front of an entire court, including these officers and the prosecutor. Your probation will now involve weekly meetings with your officer. Any misstep, no matter how minor, and you head straight to jail. Understood? Leroy mumbled. Yes, Your Honor. This outburst will be noted, and your probation officer will be informed. You're free to leave. Mr. Patterson, get a grip, all right? Leroy left silent, head hung down. Georgiana followed, keeping a safe distance. I stayed put until they were gone. Then I rose, grabbed my jacket, and headed out. In the hallway, I caught a glimpse of Georgiana's face as she stood by the elevator. She looked at me briefly, while Leroy paced by a window, talking animatedly on his phone, probably spinning his own tale. Her expression had shifted. Confusion, doubt, maybe even starting to suspect Leroy wasn't who she thought he was. The elevator arrived, and in they went, disappearing from sight. So, I decided to take the stairs, trudging down a dozen flights to make sure the coast was clear before I hit the ground floor. Stepping outside, the scorching Phoenix heat smacked me in the face. I went straight to my car, turned it on, and cranked up the air conditioning as I sat there in the garage. Leroy was on an 18-month probation, packed with check-ins and self-funded anger management classes, community service, and fines he had to cough up promptly. All that extra supervision was a headache because he couldn't keep quiet when it mattered. There were endless chances for him to mess up, appointments he could miss, payments he might skip, rules he could easily blow off. Honestly, all I had to do was sit back and watch him do what he always did. Leroy was his own worst enemy, always managing to trip himself up whenever given the chance. 6 weeks after that whole drama in the courtroom, my phone buzzed. I was lounging at an outdoor cafe off Scottsdale Road, savoring an iced cappuccino in the sunny midday. Georgiana's name flashed up on my screen. I let it ring a bit longer, took a slow sip, and then picked up. "Dad, it's me," she said in that old, familiar voice, shaky like when she was a kid and couldn't fix something herself. "Hi, Georgiana," I said. She came out with it. "Things are really hard right now. Leroy lost his job. His conviction popped up in a background check, and they fired him. We're trying, but—" She paused, gathering the strength to keep going. "I was hoping you could help us out temporarily until he finds another job." I put my cup on the table, the bustling cafe life rolling on around me. As everyone kept living their lives, my daughter was reaching out, needing a financial lifeline. "I'll help you," I replied, keeping my tone steady. "But there's a catch. You gotta—" This whole mess was difficult. I'd told her she could come back home if she split from Leroy. I was offering her a safe space, not cash or loans. The silence on her end of the line was thick, and I could hear her breathing hard, almost like panic was setting in. Then she hit me with it, almost accusing. "You want me to ditch my husband now while he's down? What kind of dad does that?" Her frustration was climbing. She started to say more, but then paused. I could almost see it, that moment she put two and two together. "You knew this was going to happen, didn't you? His job? You saw this coming, and now we're stuck. Truth is, I'd tipped them off after he went off on me at my place. Everything that followed was a result of what he did, not me. Even so, I made my stance clear. My help was for her, not for him." Then she hung up, with a click so soft yet louder than any shouting match. I just sat there, leisurely sipping my cappuccino and watching life go on around me. The people, their cars, everyone wrapped up in their own business. The Arizona heat was intense, but under the cafe's awning, it felt pretty good. My phone sat silent on the table. No calls back, no texts. And that was okay. I'd said my piece. My offer stood, whether she took it now or later. It was her move. Later, I got the lowdown on what happened at Leroy's work that morning. At 10 how, HR called him, expecting it to be a regular meeting, probably about benefits or some usual stuff. Instead, Patricia from HR, with her serious demeanor and streaks of gray in her hair, handed him a folder. "Our yearly compliance review flagged you. Our company rule says anyone with an assault charge can't deal with clients. We have to let you go right away. You'll get paid for 2 more weeks." As he stared down at the papers, words like background check, assault conviction, policy breach, and termination jumped out at him. He tried negotiating, asking to be put in a different role away from client interactions. But there were no such alternatives available. Patricia was all about sticking to the rules, keeping her demeanor unyielding. So he signed off on the paperwork, aware that fighting was pointless. He packed up his desk, a collection of awards, a mug from Georgiana, random office supplies, all echoes of better times. In the sweltering parking lot, he sat in his vehicle for a solid 10 minutes before finally hitting the road. That night in their tiny apartment, which smelled like old carpet and neighbors cooking, Leroy dropped the bomb on Georgiana. "Your dad's behind this mess. Those charges have messed up everything for me. Now it'll be a nightmare to find a job. All his fault." Georgiana was deep into the budget, scribbling numbers. Rent, $1,400. Probation, $40 every week. Anger management, $75 weekly. All the usual bills and groceries. Her paycheck barely made a dent. 2 days later, with no solution in sight, she called her dad, swallowing her pride, asking for help, and got his terms. Now here she was, standing in the apartment's tiny kitchen, phone in hand, staring at the pile of overwhelming bills. Leroy came in, curious. So, what did he say? The way she looked at him made him seem different. All the warnings her dad had given her suddenly seemed so real. He said no, he won't help, she answered. She left out the part about her dad offering help, but only for her, only if she made a choice she wasn't ready to make. I knew it, Leroy said, sounding both bitter and pleased. He wants to see us fail. It's obvious now. Your own father, letting you down when you need him most. Georgiana just nodded, her mind replaying her dad's words over and over. He'd been clear. I'm here to help you. But you need to file for divorce and come back home. Just you. Not the both of you. Just you. She stared at the mountain of bills, unable to make sense of the numbers. As a co-signer on the lease for this little apartment, it was like a physical reminder of what she'd lost. Her home, her security, her dad's trust. File for divorce, come home. His words haunted her. Her hands shook as she gathered up the bills, straightening them even though they didn't need it. But the question lingered. Could she really do it? 6 weeks passed in silence between us. The July heat in Phoenix pressed down like an oven, with temperatures soaring beyond 110 degrees every day. I stayed put with the air conditioning humming away, spending early mornings on the patio reading before the heat got unbearable. I didn't reach out to Georgiana, and she didn't contact me. It was a deliberate kind of quiet, like we were both waiting for something we couldn't quite put our finger on. In their apartment, things were getting tense. Leroy, still jobless and seemingly unhireable, sent off job applications into the ether, with no replies. Even when he did score an interview, it always ended the same: background check, conviction, and a polite thanks for applying. Meanwhile, Georgiana was grinding away, working remotely for 50-hour weeks, struggling to keep up with skyrocketing costs. The rent got behind, a week, then 2. The landlord slipped a formal notice under their door: pay up in 5 days or face eviction. On a sticky afternoon, Georgiana was at the cramped apartment's little desk, staring at her open work email without seeing it. Something about tax documents that her accountant had needed fixing. The old filing cabinet stood beside her, full of papers Leroy had organized when they moved in. As she searched for last year's tax forms, she found a manila folder marked Fidelity Retirement. Curious yet hesitant, she pulled it out. These were her accounts. Sure, everything was online now, but the folder felt too heavy, suspiciously thick. She opened it. The first statement showed a $28,000 balance, matching what she'd remembered from December. But then January showed a $7,000 withdrawal, leaving $21,000. Her fingers went cold. February, another $5,000 gone. Balance, $16,000. March, $3,000 vanished, leaving just $13,000. In 3 months, $15,000 missing, transactions she didn't agree to or authorize. Her retirement savings were dwindling while they squatted rent-free in her dad's place. She jumped up, her chair crashing against the wall. "Leroy!" she called out. He looked up from the couch where he'd been either searching job listings or pretending to. "What?" She stormed into the living room, clutching the statements, fingers shaking with more than just anger. What raged inside her was cold, a sharp-edged fury. $15,000? She dropped the papers on the coffee table in front of him. "Gone from my retirement account, 3 withdrawals, not a single signature from me." "Go on, explain yourself," Georgiana said, her voice steady. Leroy's face cycled through surprise, shame, and defensiveness before he clung to a self-righteous tone. "We had no choice," he insisted. "We needed money for bills, the apartment deposit, legal fees. Your dad cut us off. What else could I do?" He stood up, his words coming quickly. "It's community property. I didn't technically need your okay. Married couples share everything financially." "And you did this while living in his house?" Her voice was flat, unreadable. "Before we hit these costs, you were already dipping into my account. Where was all that money going?" "It wasn't stealing, Georgiana. It was our money. I was managing our household's finances. Finances I was kept in the dark about. Money you hid from me." She clung to the financial statements as if they were proof that needed her protection. "When were you planning on telling me?" "When there was nothing left. My plan was to replenish it once my commissions came in." "Commissions?" she retorted. "You haven't closed any deals for months. You haven't worked in 6 weeks. There's nothing to replace." Suddenly their argument rose to a volume that could be heard through their paper-thin walls. Leroy stormed into the bedroom, slamming the door shut. Left standing alone in the living room, Georgiana clutched the papers, breathing unsteadily as she headed to the bathroom, locked the door, and perched on the toilet lid, reaching for her phone. She logged into her retirement account, and there it was. The balance had plummeted from $28,000 to $13,000. She quickly typed Leroy's name with debt into her browser and found the whole mess through the credit monitoring app they had set up after getting married. She had never dug into his credit report before. She trusted him, assumed he was managing things sensibly. But there were 7 credit cards, all maxed out, totaling $43,000 in debt. Crunching the numbers on her phone, she realized the grim truth. Her account had lost $15,000, coupled with the $43,000 debt, making it a colossal $58,000 hole. Yet Leroy pinned the blame on her father. She recalled a phone call from 6 weeks ago. Her father's calm, steadfast voice offered help with one stipulation: get a divorce and come home. Somehow, he had seen it all: the withdrawals, the debts, everything. His proposal wasn't punishment, it was a lifeline. Trembling, she opened another browser tab, searching "Divorce Attorney Scottsdale, Arizona." That night, Georgiana didn't share the bed with Leroy. Instead, she slept on the couch. As dawn broke, and before Leroy awoke, she sent her dad a message. "Can we meet, just us? I need clarity." His reply was swift. "Just name the spot." They picked a coffee shop along Camelback Road, a neutral location for both. Her father arrived first, casually dressed in a polo and khakis, calm and ready. She showed up 10 minutes late, anxiety keeping her circling the block before she found the courage to stop. He'd ordered her a latte, just as she liked it, a tender gesture that nearly undid her. Settling at a corner table, she stirred her coffee with no intention of drinking it. "Why did you do this?" she asked, finally lifting her eyes to meet his. "Why press charges, refuse help, and push for divorce?" Her father's expression was serene, patient, as always. "I didn't act against you," he said softly. "He violated my trust. I reported it and let the justice system work. I can't support a man who robs you and shifts the blame to everyone else." She stared down at her coffee, absorbing his words. "You knew about the retirement money disappearing. That's why you set that condition, to divorce and come home. You wanted to save me from him." Her father held her gaze steadily. "Does it matter how I found out? What matters is the truth. It's about what you choose to do with it." She gave a slow nod as her spoon lazily circled the untouched coffee. Outside, the scorching July heat wavered over the asphalt parking lot. Inside, the air conditioning hummed, maintaining a cool, tranquil atmosphere. If I came back home, she began tentatively, probing the possibilities. What would that look like? Her dad answered, Your room's just like you left it. We changed the locks, so he can't get in. The protective order's still in place and enforceable. A quiet moment passed while she thought about her cramped apartment. Walls thin as paper, overdue rent, Leroy's growing temper, and a marriage that left her depleted, all adding up to a heap of stress. I need time to think this over, she eventually said. Take all the time you need. Her father stood up, left money on the table for their coffees, and said, The offer's always open. He left first, letting her sit there with her untouched latte and her tangled thoughts that weren't quite ready for action yet. But something shifted inside her. The balance had tipped. The question wasn't whether she'd leave, but when. 10 days rolled by, and as I sat reading on the patio, my phone buzzed. Georgiana's voice came through with a newfound certainty. Dad, I'm coming home today. Can it be today? Sure, whenever you say. I'm ready now. She had waited for Leroy to leave for a probation meeting earlier that morning. Once he drove out of the apartment complex, she immediately phoned her divorce lawyer. Wasting no time, she drove right to the downtown Scottsdale office. Patricia Chen, a shrewd attorney who knew her way around tough divorce cases, had the documents ready. Georgiana glanced over them briefly and signed her name firmly on 3 separate lines. No hesitation. Irreconcilable differences, mishandling of shared finances, details of the property division laid out. Patricia uploaded everything to the court's online system right in front of her. A green notification appeared on the screen. Filing accepted. Patricia explained it would be around 60 days before the divorce was finalized. She handed Georgiana 2 sets of papers, one for her and one for him, and set up for a police officer to be there that night, ensuring Georgiana could safely gather her remaining belongings. Georgiana drove back, papers on the car seat beside her, and began packing without a second thought. Clothes were packed methodically into suitcases. The laptop was carefully stored in its case. Key documents were collected, and family photos were taken out of their frames, leaving behind only memories. The wedding photo, however, she left behind, turned face down on the dresser. She heard Leroy's car pulling in around 1 o'clock, the telltale sound of footsteps climbing the stairs, the familiar click of his key in the lock. Leroy entered and froze. He saw the bags lined up by the door, her purse ready, keys in hand. "What's happening?" he demanded. She calmly retrieved the divorce papers from her purse and handed them to him. "I filed for divorce this morning," she said firmly. "You've got the digital copy too. I'm moving back to my dad's." Leroy's face cycled through emotions, flushed, pale, then flushed again, as he tossed the papers to the floor. "Over? Because of him? Your dad's been poisoning you against me. I made mistakes, sure, but we can fix this. Don't let him split us apart, Georgiana." She knelt, picked up the papers, folded them neatly, and placed them back in her purse. Her voice was gentle but resolute. "You stole $15,000 from my retirement account and didn't pay a dime of rent. You've never taken responsibility for anything. You threw a glass at my dad. I didn't end this. You did." Determined, she picked up her bags and headed for the door. He trailed after her, raising his voice, nearing desperation, but never laid a hand on her. He remembered the officer's warnings about probation violations and the serious consequences another slip-up would mean. She loaded up the car without a backward glance, started the engine as he stood there in the lot, shouting questions she chose to block out. She drove away, watching his figure shrink in the rearview mirror until he was just a speck. 20 minutes later, my doorbell rang. When I opened the door, there she was, tears marking paths on her cheeks, and 2 suitcases standing by her side. Without saying anything, I stepped back and left the door open wide for her. "Welcome home," I said softly. She came in like she was finally able to breathe after holding her breath for such a long time. I lugged her suitcases up to the guest room, which I had discreetly made ready. Fresh sheets on the bed, an empty dresser, a closet with hangers, and towels neatly arranged on a chair. These little gestures spoke for themselves. "You're welcome here, no explanation required." "Take your time, get settled," I told her from the doorway wearily. "I've made dinner. It's staying warm in the oven if you're hungry. We don't have to talk about anything tonight unless you want to." She nodded, not trusting her voice just yet. That evening, as Patricia had arranged, Georgiana was met by a police escort when she went back to her apartment complex. 2 officers, a man and a woman, acted with professionalism and showed patience as if they had seen this scenario many times before. "Ma'am, feel free to collect your belongings. Sir, kindly keep your distance. This is a legal separation process, and you are required not to interfere. Otherwise, we'll have to escort you from the premises." Leroy stayed at the door to the bedroom as Georgiana packed, filling boxes with more of her clothes, books, and kitchen gadgets she had bought with her own money. The officers stood in such a way to maintain a clear boundary, but didn't act aggressively. Georgiana packed quickly and deliberately, making one last sweep of the drawers and closets. She found a cherished photo of her mother and wrapped it delicately in a sweater, leaving their wedding album on the closet shelf untouched. After about 25 minutes and 4 boxes, she was done. The officers assisted her in carrying the boxes to her car. Leroy watched from his apartment window, reminiscent of a child looking at something just out of reach, as she loaded a couple of boxes into her car. The officers helped her with some more, while she carried the rest by herself. With a quick thank you to the officers, she got into the driver's seat and left that drab little place behind, with its paper-thin walls and its burden of overdue bills. She was gone for good. She arrived at my house, where the bedroom light was on like an open invitation waiting for her. She brought in the last of her boxes and placed them in the corner of what used to be a guest room, but was now undeniably hers. We stood there a moment, enjoying the silence and the space she was reclaiming. Sure, the paint was old and the furniture looked out of place and time, but the room felt safe and like home. "We need to paint this room," she murmured. "A fresh start." I looked at her and saw someone who had come so far, a completely different woman from the one who had left months ago to stand by a man unworthy of her. She was stronger now, sure of herself, ready to start anew. "What color?" I asked her warmly. She gave me a smile, her first genuine smile in so long. "Something bright," she said. "Something that feels like hope." Fast forward 3 weeks to a late August morning, another promising scorcher of a day. I was on the patio with my coffee and newspaper. The room upstairs had shed its old guest room look. Now it boasted soft blue walls with new curtains and furniture we'd assembled together. Familiar photos were up on the walls, her as a child, one of her mom and me at our wedding, and other snapshots from happier times. No wedding photos with Leroy. Those pages were closed. Around 10, I heard the mail slot clatter. When I gathered up the mail, 2 envelopes grabbed my attention right away. One was a large manila envelope from the Maricopa County Superior Court for Georgiana, while the other was a regular business envelope from the county clerk's office addressed to me. I made my way up the stairs, giving her door a gentle knock. She looked up from her laptop, pausing her work. "The decree came," I told her. Her face ran through a whirlwind of emotions before settling on something like relief, mixed with determination. She saved what she was doing, got up, and followed me into the kitchen. We sat down at the table, and she opened the envelope, pulling out the document to read. "Dissolution of marriage granted, effective immediately. Property divided as stipulated. Petitioner gets the retirement account balance minus previous withdrawals. Respondent keeps all personal debt obligations. All marital obligations terminated today, August 28, 2025, she recited out loud. She read it over a second time, folded it neatly, and placed it on the table, pressing her hand on it as if to make it more real. "It's done," she said. I nodded and then opened my own envelope with a letter opener, finding just one official notice. Notification of case closure. State of Arizona versus Leroy Patterson. All plea agreement terms satisfied. Probation completed. Community service verified. Anger management program certificate received. Victim notification done. Case file archived, it read. I only needed a glimpse before heading to my office and putting it inside the drawer on top of the police report and other legal documents. I closed that drawer with a sense of finality. The afternoon slipped by without much going on. Georgiana worked upstairs, and I sat reading in the living room. We'd grown into two people who could share space comfortably without either invading or avoiding each other. As the day cooled around 6, we carried our coffee mugs out to the back patio. I'd picked up another chair to match mine once she had moved in, a small acknowledgement that her being here was permanent. We watched as the desert light played before us, the quiet between us a comforting presence. "Dad, I'm sorry I didn't listen at first," she said softly. "Sorry I chose him over you. Sorry it took so long to see." I took a sip of coffee, letting her words settle before responding. "You saw it when you were ready, and no one can rush that. You made it here, and that's what matters. We're here now." She turned her gaze to the horizon, where the mountains met the darkening sky. "Is it bad that I feel relieved? Not angry or vengeful, just free?" she wondered aloud. "That's exactly how you should feel. Making it to freedom is the goal," I assured her, knowing healing had started to take root. We sat there quietly for a bit. A bird sang from somewhere in the mesquite trees, and every so often a car would pass by on the distant road. She reached over and gently patted my hand. It was a small gesture, but it conveyed gratitude and connection. I nodded to show I understood. We stayed put, watching the sky change colors from orange and purple to a deep, dark blue. Slowly, stars began to appear. At first, just the brightest ones, then more and more until the sky was sprinkled with twinkling lights. My mind drifted back to what the last 6 months had been like. I remembered the day glass shattered near my head, leaving a streak of blood on my collar. That's the day I decided it was time to document everything and seek legal action, seeing the justice system do its job as it should. Leroy's downfall wasn't on me. I just stopped enabling him. I quit throwing money at his problems and pretending it was okay to attack someone just because they had the same last name. What came after, his arrest, conviction, job loss, and eventual divorce, were all consequences of his choices, not any revenge from me. Georgiana was healing, going to therapy twice a week, finding steady work, and sleeping peacefully again. Mornings sometimes filled with her humming as she made coffee, bringing back a warmth that had been missing for too long. The protective order still stood, but Leroy had left Arizona 3 days after the divorce papers were filed, moving in with his brother in Nevada. He was starting fresh, but at 37, all he had was debt and a criminal record. I held no grudge against him. I simply didn't give him any more of my thoughts. My home was back to being a quiet, peaceful place. It was truly mine, now more than ever, with my daughter alongside me, building her own life instead of being dragged down by someone else's mistakes. As night fell and the stars began to multiply across the sky, a cool breeze swept over the desert, brushing gently against my skin. "We ought to head inside," Georgiana suggested after a while. "We have an early start tomorrow." I stood up and offered my hand to her, helping her rise. Together, we gathered our cups and headed indoors. She made her way up to her blue room, filled with decorations full of hope. I listened as the sound of her door closing softly reached me, and I could hear her moving around, preparing to turn in for the night. After turning off the patio light and securing the house, I paused briefly. Everything inside was as it should be, just right in its place.